महावीर जयंती की इस पावन संध्या पर मैं आप सभी का स्वागत करता हूं। 2600 years back, India innovated yet another paradigm of bravery, the bravery of non-violence. They said Mahavir, he means the bravest of all. What comprised of the elements of this great bravery were the principles of non-violence, ahimsa, the principle of Arihant. Mahavir is also known as Arihant, who is the vanquisher of enemies, and also the practice of Shraman, one who strives. So how it is all relevant in today's Higher Education Forum, Delhi? This entire journey took off on Makar Sankranti in January this year. The idea was to understand, to document the footprints of the vivid mindsets of the Indian higher education system. India thinks differently, and for ages, scholars and intellectuals visiting this grand old civilization have been overwhelmed by its innate complexity and diversity. People have their opinions, right from being negationist to extreme positive, romantic fascinations about this grand country. When I said a lot of, I would say, national narratives have been going on to take on this country, to take on, to get its due space in the Committee of Nations. The entire spectrum of national agenda which have been set up in front of us, somewhere or the other, India's higher education space has got a dominant role to play. Now, this was the core central theme, the central quest around which these higher education forums were convened. We went on to ask a range of around 500 campuses across the country as to what is their preparedness for taking on the global challenges, to take it on the emerging global trends. How are they preparing themselves? And as you can see, the theme of today's evening, how we can create a synergized and a result-oriented higher education environment. Because this synergized, we have got, I would like to welcome our guests from the Defense Forces, from the PSUs, who all will be panelists in today's sessions out here. How we can create a synergized and a result-oriented higher education environment in this country. Just day before back, we were with one of the senior officials with MHRD, and they were saying that we really don't talk, the various departments just don't talk within each other. Even the IITs don't talk to the NITs, and NITs don't talk to the other premier institutions. The STU Vice Chancellors, we would be having the gracious presence of Professor R.K. Khandal. The STU VCs also don't talk to the other premier institutions. So it's all working in silos. The various departments, the various mechanizations which are happening across. So Engineering Watch thought, why not evoke this conversation, a serious communication across the higher education fraternity. And जैसे पहले एक समय में रथ घोड़ा छोड़ा जाता था, अश्वमेध यज्ञ किए जाते थे दिग्विजय करने के लिए, just to win over things. So we also said, why not do it at Chandigarh in the north? Then we went on to Chennai in the south. Then on 31st, the closure of the last financial year, we were in Pune. It was a fabulous gathering out there, and the discussions just surpassed our time limits, and it was such an engaging performance out there. And today, in this imperial capital of India, I use the word imperial capital because it was in the days of Pandavas that Delhi was gained its prominence. It was again in 1911 when Delhi again became the national capital, and it's here from where the national policies and things are done. So today I would, before starting formally, किसी भी यज्ञ के समापन पे देवता भी विघ्न उत्पन्न करते हैं. So some of the guests had some issues out here. This is Scope Convention Center. We chose this illustrious center because this is the hub of engineering of this country, the Standing Conference on Public Sector Enterprises. So this is a place where all the PSUs, central PSUs, state PSUs are coordinated across. So some of the guests might have found some issues with the arrangements, with the kind of hospitality we had expected. Being a Mahavir Jayanti, the other staff were not present out here. So my apologies from this dais for anyone who has faced any kind of an inconvenience in coming out here and making it big. So when I said I introduced the three terms of Ahimsa, Arihant and Shraman. So how it is relevant today, and this is the context in which we will be taking forward today's deliberations. all the kind of inefficiencies which are all across, especially in our context of higher education, the inefficiencies which are existing all across, the inadequacies which we are struggling with, and the incompetencies which we are trying to cope up with. These are all, their existence creates a lot of violence. Now, eliminating them all calls for ahimsa. So that's where one of the interpretation can come across, because to be an ahimsak, Mahavir Swami had to be an arihant. He had to be a vanquisher of enemies. So these enemies of inadequacies, incompetencies, and inefficiencies is something which we need to take it forward, because our higher education system has only to provide the basis for either it is a Make in India campaign, or it is a Swachh Bharat campaign, or it is whatever national vision we are seeking for, because it is the demographic dividend on which this country would flourish and take its own space in the Committee of Nations. With this a bit of philosophical introduction, I would like to invite Mr. Raj Mrityunjayappa, who was the judgeman of this entire yagna. So we were just the hotas of that, we were the purohitas over there. So he was the mukhya judgeman. So I would like to introduce our sponsor for this entire exercise, who had something similar in his mind, and he gave us really the open van. Ki Purohit, go ahead and invoke this yagna as the way you want. And this was certainly quite, I will say, rare in these days, but Raj gave us that thing, and something phenomenal has come this evening. We will be releasing the report for the Campus Preparedness Survey. You might all have heard about the NESCOM McKinsey, the fabled NESCOM McKinsey report, which was released in around 2004, which somewhere gave us a negative stereotype that चार में से एक ही लड़का अच्छा है. It was just a linear thought, a linear top level thought. But कौन सा लड़का अच्छा है, किस profession के लिए अच्छा? Because India has a three genre, three strata of higher education. In the space of technical education, we have IITs and ITs and OPIs. We have private universities and the deemed universities. And at the bottom of the stack, the bottom of the pyramid, which the likes of C.K. Prahlad and all, and they bring about all the revolution across, we have got the 3,000 plus state technical university affiliated institutions, where we have at least one of them in 412 districts of the country. So Engineering Watch, since its inception, has been asking this dominant question, that can these institutions can be seen as the growth centers, as the catalytic centers for India's growth, India's development. It is only the perception. 15 years or 20 years back, when we were in our class 9th and 8th, the burgeoning population of the country was seen as a big problem, as if India is going to dogs because of the but that population itself is saying that we have a demographic dividend like no other country has. And for your information, if you are following it across, the People's Republic of China is now repenting for their one-child policy. So it's only the perception, it is only the perspective from which we look at the state of things. And this higher education forum is probably to invoke some of those thinking heads which you guys have been doing it on your campuses, the excellent work which will be recognized this evening. And the campus preparedness report I talked about, it will certainly go down in history as one of those seminal reports which has really gone to the roots and the depths of India's higher education system, and it has really tried to analyze it from a first principles mechanism where 50% of the questions were subjective in nature. So this is something, a daring, which no other agency or no consulting firm ever does it. It is all, whatever answers you have to get it done, you reverse engineer and put it into questions. That was not our mandate, or never the outcome of it. I would, without losing any time, I would request Raj to give his welcome note as to how, being a judgeman, how he saw through the entire exercise and where he sees this yagna going forward.
Thank you, Raghav, and welcome everybody. With the kind of introduction he gave me, I was actually misfit for that because I'm wearing tie and suit. I should have come in like a turban with a, lungi and come running like this, like the past. So thank you for the great introduction. But what's more important is all of you who are here. Our idea, our objective through this whole exercise has been, how do we get like-minded people coming together here across pan-India. So we talked about, this is our fourth event, and this is the large, the final event that we are actually going to be releasing, the national report. We have been fortunate enough to have zonal abstract being released at each one of these 4 regions. And the discussions and the deliberations has been so intense and so involved. I can tell you that I've actually only slept 3 hours every day for the last 2 weeks. Just thinking through this and thinking through how do we actually take this to the next level, how do we actually evolve from here and just not leave it as this kind of an event and just walk away from here. So as we think through, in terms of where this journey started, we actually, campus management, we are a technology solution provider. We are, if you think about solving all your challenges, your scale-related challenges, your governance-related challenges, your outcome-based challenges, any of those challenges that you face, we'll be happy to work with you in providing technology solutions and consulting to overcome some of those challenges and enable you to be successful. That's what we do. However, what was important for us is, although we have been across the globe in various countries, for us it was very important that we understand the challenges of each region by itself. So this study really is for us to come up, evolve this, and we were thinking about how do we go about this process. And in that process, in that journey, we came across Engineering Watch. And they had a similar vision of wanting to go out there and understand and have a reach and get a feel for it. So we put together a very comprehensive, I would say, thought in putting together, we don't want to call it a survey because a survey sounds very small for this. Because what we really did was interview many of you in this room and many across India for about 2.5 hours to 4 hours per person. And that recording, actually just to save that, restore that recording, we have a large location. But what is more important is all of that information that we've gathered, to consolidate that into making one single report is a humongous task. So I would like to thank all the people involved from campus management side as well as from Engineering Watch side for having done a fabulous job over the last 100 days. This actually is the 100th day, I can say, for having done this brilliant work across the board. And what I can assure you is that this is only a stepping stone. We have to continue to evolve this. We have to continue to come up with, how do you take this to regulators, to ministry, to everyone, all the stakeholders who probably are participating here or are not participating here, make sure that they listen to these challenges and we collectively come together and address some of those, at least the priority ones, high priority ones. So, some of the sessions we're going to have a lot of conversations here, but I want to kind of lay out some of the points that I thought about as I thought about these sessions, and we go through this. And the first and foremost for me is I'm a student and continue to be a student. I probably studied in one of the institutions such as yours, and so did you. And while we studied, there were a few things which were missing. Those were things like social media, mobile phones. There were a few things missing when we studied. And all of a sudden, it looks like those have become the most important things these days. You can't find a student without a mobile phone. You can't. It's probably difficult to find a student who does not have a WhatsApp on their mobile phone. It's very difficult to find people with no Facebook ID. It's very difficult for us to have students without email IDs. In fact, many institutions say without having one, you cannot actually be part of this institute. So a few things have changed. And we got to understand, along with the few things that have changed, I can tell you that there are a few jobs which have changed. To name a few, we did not have a job called social media manager 10 years ago. There was no job called data mining engineer. There was nothing called admission consultant. There was no job called user experience designers. These are all jobs that are all of a sudden coming in the last 10 years. And those seem to be the most high-paying jobs. I mean, if we had told you there's going to be 10 years ago that there's going to be somebody called cloud computing engineer, you probably would have thought I'm talking about some kind of a weather report man. You wouldn't have thought actually this can be actually a technology person. Right? In fact, when the cloud as a word was first came in, there was a spoof that came out, and there was this video about a person talking about, do you want to store data on the cloud? He says, what happens if it rains? Right? So, but 10 years later, you see where we are. Everybody talks about cloud. Cloud computing engineer is the future. So as you look at some of the jobs that has come together here, it's quite fascinating. Well, let's fast forward 10 years from now. Can you imagine what kind of jobs are going to be there 10 years from now? Well, I've taken a few shots at it, and I thought I'll share it with you. I think it's going to be called a digital architect. Right? A digital architect. I think there's going to be something called waste management handlers. Because there's going to be so much waste on this earth that we need to have somebody who's managing this waste. There's going to be nanomedic. Nanomedic, if you're not familiar with the word nanomedics, these are people who will be actually making small body parts. Right? There will be, people who are in the body plant engineers themselves. Why? Because you can actually these days replace knee. I'm sure there's 10 years from now you'll be replacing kidneys, and there's heart already as in place, is coming together. So, and this is not medical, this is engineering. So, you look 10 years forward, and this is not something that I'm telling you, you probably have never heard of, but you've never thought of it that way. That as we look at what we are actually building today in our institutions, these are our own students who will come out of this institutions and will be actually going out there and will be catering to the world in the next 5 years, 10 years. The future is about elderly well-being, because there's so many more elders who's going to come into this world. With the life expectancy going up, elderly well management is going to be a big issue. These days you don't get nurses. Right? Nursing has suddenly evolved all over again. There used to be a day when there was nursing. So, similarly you have, we call them, this is a most funny term that I read when I was reading about this, this is called avatar managers. Avatar. Avatar managers, because once this cloning and all these things will take into effect and it becomes very attractive, these are going to be it's hard to say, but you probably can design your kids. So, if you think about the future, it sounds very, very, unrealistic. So did when we think about 10 years ago and said, what will be the job for today? It really looked, unrealistic. So, why am I making the point? The point I'm trying to make is, as we look ahead and look at the institutional development, as we look ahead and see the students, are we looking at the students in terms of the future ready? Are we actually enabling technology, leveraging technology to the extent that we should be? Not in the context of saying I have a smart card or I have something else, but are we leveraging technology to the way students would like to be involved in technology? Every kid these days who are growing up are growing with technology. They are more friendly with technology than us. And they are more friendly on a technology. It's probably easier to get a response from a teenager over an SMS than it is when you talk to them over the face. It's much, I told this example 2 days ago when my kid was 4-year-old, she went up to the TV and she was doing this. And I could not understand why she was doing this on the TV. Till I realized actually she meant iPad. Because the iPad, when you do this, the iPad opens up. So she was doing it on TV, she thought TV is going to open up. So kids these days are growing with technology. They are relating to technology. And how much of this technology are we leveraging? How well are we adopting this? The way they look at it, not the way we think about it. Right? We are almost afraid in some ways to give them technology and say, I'm going to make it a digital classroom and give them all laptops and make them say, okay, now. The worry that we have is, are they actually listening to a lecture or watching YouTube there? But I can tell you that should be least of our concern. It should be how well can we leverage the technology, the tablets, the mobiles, and everything that we have, and enhance the education. There is also tons of content available online. And I'm sure you agree with me, from Khan Academy to all the content that's available online. It's almost, one of these kind of sessions I asked the question, what can you teach that doesn't exist online? Is there something you can teach in a classroom where the content is not available online? You can teach practicals, you can teach them to discipline, you can teach them life skills, but purely from a content standpoint, pretty much everything that we teach is available online. And most of the time it's competing knowledge. Sometimes it's confusing knowledge. So we as faculty, we as university, we as the guides and mentors, we need to guide them to say which is the right content. Because content is confusing when it's too much in front of them. So have we as faculty, as universities and as technologists, have we evolving our own methodology, teaching methodology to be that facilitators versus being the teachers? And of course, from a larger perspective, how much is faculty being trained? How much is faculty being as closely involved with technology? Because that is, if you are even one step behind the student when it comes to technology and the way they use it, you're obviously way behind because they're moving much, much faster. So these are some of the challenges, and I'm sure a lot of these things will come up today as we go through this. We're going to challenge each other in terms of how technology can enable, how technology can drive forward. But I also want to give a very short view about what you have all collectively thought about when it comes to when we did this, interviews across Pan-India, some of the things that has come out, and which is quite interesting how it connects back to what I just talked about. One of the first on the top 5 things that has come out as part of the report, the number one priority for all the institutions, 85% of the institutions have actually called this out, is the further efficiency of faculty is the number one priority. And what I just talked before really resonates well. How do we actually get greater efficiency across faculty? 85% of you are thinking that way. Similarly, the second parameter, which I think this is probably contentious, and I would like to challenge it and give you a global statistics on this, is consolidating infrastructure. And here, 90% of the institution think that actually, although consolidating infrastructure is a high priority, 90% of them think that I'm actually leveraging my infrastructure really, really well. I don't think so, because global statistics tell me, including some of the global, some of the advanced countries, that of all the infrastructure in your institutions, that includes larger buildings, your buses and all that, but also your projectors, your smart screens, if you include all of them as infrastructure for education. Globally, only 21% gets utilized. So we can't be doing something spectacular that we are utilizing it 90%. That means we are actually not measuring the efficiency of our infrastructure. What you cannot measure, you cannot fix. So are we measuring all this infrastructure in that perspective? Also comes the next point on the report was on focus on research. Not at all surprised. In fact, as an industry, we also represent the industry as part of what we do, and I can tell you that your focus on research is as important for us from the industry standpoint. And we would like to see how we can help you drive that research programs, because the more research you do, the more innovation that you build, the more incubation centers you build, you'll only produce better students coming out of there, which would only help us. But more importantly, you'll also would have actually developed some intellectual property that we can then look at how to commercialize. Improving ranking is another top priority. That's the 4th one on the list. And the 5th one on the list, and which was actually quite interesting, was adopting technology. 75% of you said adopting technology. And the 6th one was placement. So I think what I would like to do on the report is take out the 5th point, which is adopting technology, and introduce the placement of the 5th point. Right? But then look at how do we use technology across all these 5 points. Why not adopt technology, solve all these 5 points? Why only look at technology adoption as one of the points? So I'm sure there are a lot of things like this that's going to come through as you read the report. It is going to be quite comprehensive. It is not a 2-page report as you see in the front of your tables. That's only an abstract. The report is going to take you probably 2 weeks of digestion. And I'm sure that we're going to come back and have more deliberations around this. With that, I really thank you all again for coming down here and joining us for this lovely event this evening. I am looking forward to learning from you all through this evening, and I'm sure we will leave back some things that you probably came into this room not knowing, and you'll carry back with you. That's the purpose of this, and welcome one and all, giving us this honor of representing us in front of you, and look forward to an excellent evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj, for this wonderful welcome. Since time immemorial, India has been blessed. It has been the great good fortune of India to receive the wisdom and the learnings from wide shores. Scholars and intellectuals have come to this land of wisdom and they have shared it across. Similarly, in the modern era as well, India still learns and still is open for learning from some of the best advanced nations on the globe. Today we have a special guest with us. We have with us Mr. Jim Milton. He is the Chief Executive Officer with the Campus Management Corp. Campus Management manages around 2,000 Ivy League universities across the globe in around 26 countries. So this is an occasion where we have got a person who leads the entire practice of managing a campus end to end by a wide variety of products and services, and someone who has really seen the mechanizations of one of the finest higher education system which is in the United States of America. So I would invite Mr. Milton to give his welcome remarks in this august audience as to what he sees the Indian context and how his company can certainly assist and help the Indian counterparts to really achieve the global excellence.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I will only spend 4 hours at the podium. Just kidding, don't worry. But it is truly an honor and a privilege to be a sponsor of this event. And unlike in the introductory remarks, I will say that we're here as much to learn, in fact more so to learn than it is to kind of present to you. We do have, following me, a brief presentation on kind of what we see as the trends in higher education around the world. It's amazing that we see a lot of consistency. You might find from one country to another, some of the major trends have a different prioritization, but for example, in the video clip that you saw, which was developed for the US market, you saw the point about declining enrollments. That's a fact within the US market. It's not a fact in many other markets around the world. But we certainly see the importance on placements and outcomes as well in countries around the world. I have to say that just, by the way, this is, I've been the CEO of Campus Management now for about 8 months, so I'm relatively new to this company. But I have been to India a few times since coming on board with Campus Management. And prior to that, the last time I was in India was about 10 years ago, and in Delhi in particular. And it's amazing to see the transformation of this nation in 10 years. You all live it day to day, and it probably feels like the transformation is happening too slowly because you're there every day, but I can tell you, coming in 10 years later, it's impressive to see the transformation of the nation. And again, the pace is probably not fast enough for a lot of us, but in areas like infrastructure, for example, I can tell you in the week I've been here, I've only had 2 minor power outages in that week. I can tell you 10 years ago, that was, as you all know, a very daily occurrence. So just as an example, a lot of progress on the airports, on the roads, and I think that's important. A lot more needs to be made, as an example, but that is spectacular. Progress on the regulatory front. Again, we need to have a lot more progress there as well as we go forward. We certainly need more funding for higher education in this nation, but nonetheless, I think a tremendous amount of progress. A quick update on campus management. I'll keep the commercial very brief, but I will tell you that we are really an American and Indian company in many respects. We actually have more employees in India than anywhere else in the world, and in fact more employees here than the rest of the world combined. We have a major presence, a development center in Bangalore. We have an office here in Delhi. And it's interesting to kind of look at the differences between our US and Indian organization. The average age in India of our employees is 26 years old. In the United States, it's 45. So in some of the opening remarks, when we talked about the impact of technology, our Indian employees have grown up with technology essentially since they're only 26 now. In the US, that hasn't always been the case, so we see some differences between the two. We have, by the way, in India, we have the full life cycle of positions. We do development, so we have over 100 engineers doing coding and building intellectual property that in many cases is exported to other parts of the world. So we very much, to a large extent, have embraced Make in India. We have implementation teams that actually are involved in projects all around the world. We have, for example, a major project in Uganda right now where we're helping all the top institutions in Uganda in terms of their implementation, and that's being delivered out of India. We support the Middle East out of India, for example. We have a large support organization, and this is the international headquarters for the company. As Raj briefly mentioned, we are a provider to higher education and higher education exclusively, and we're very honored to be part of that because we believe very much that higher education is critical in the transformation of nations around the world. It's a way to drive growth in a nation. It's a way to improve the productivity of a nation. And I think this very much needs to be a central underpinning of the Make in India initiative. And again, we see this around the world. It's a major impact, and not only to the nation, of course, but as importantly, and I would argue more importantly, to individuals. This is a way to create entire, for example, the middle class. The only path to move to middle class and beyond is through, in my view, higher education. So we are truly honored to be part of that initiative, and very much so here in India as well. We provide a range of solutions for higher education, the administrative backbone, or what I sometimes call the central nervous system of an institution, also known as the student information system. This is where student records are contained. We provide back office systems, finance, HR, faculty management systems, and as, if not more importantly, a range of solutions around engagement, or what we call constituent engagement. Another term for this is CRM. And we have many institutions, some of the largest institutions in the US and around the world, that are using our technology to help drive up enrollments, to ensure that they have what we call a 360-degree view of the student. Every single communication to the student is managed through this CRM system. It's useful for retention purposes. So for example, we have institutions that may notice that a student was not using their meal plan. Perhaps an intervention is needed by a counselor to help address the needs. They could have personal issues that a counselor could help with. So we have a full life cycle of solutions that we bring to the table for higher education. As was mentioned, we have around 2,000 campuses around the world that are our customers today, so we have a kind of a unique position to be able to see what's going on around the world. In fact, next week I'll be in Brazil. We have a strong position in Brazil. They're going through lots of regulatory challenges right now within that marketplace, which is putting a lot of strain on higher education. It's interesting to see the different kinds of dynamics within countries. For example, it doesn't so much exist here, but in other countries you have a for-profit sector, as you see in the United States, also exists in Brazil, which is a very different kind of delivery model. But one trend you see, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in the panel as well, is really the movement towards what we call a hybrid delivery model, where you have a mix of online and on-campus delivery, and be able to do that simultaneously, and as you're going to hear in just a moment from Connor, in an on-demand way, because that's what the students are demanding. They grew up with technology. They're going to want to see their education delivered in a similar model, and not just, for example, on a semester-based kind of program that you would see in a typical on-campus environment. So we see those trends to varying degrees around the world. So with those remarks, I'm going to get on to allow the session to move on. I'm looking forward to the panels. I was in the event in Pune, and it was highly interactive. By the way, just one observation for here versus Pune. This is a much better looking group than in Pune. Don't tell anybody in Pune that I said that. But nonetheless, we're...
better looking people.
So, nonetheless, I want to thank you for your participation. We're here to learn, as well as impart some information as we go through the various panels. That's, I think, where the real action is, and I would encourage you, although I probably don't need to please be interactive. This is really a chance for you to kind of open up and challenge and bring your own thoughts to the table, even if you're not in the panel. We're here to learn, we're here to contribute, and once again, thanks very much for your participation, and we're honored to be part of this event. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Milton, for this exhilarating remarks. We used to have rishis in our country. Rishis used to meditate on a particular thematic area for the larger welfare of humanity. And they used to meditate and come across with their mantras. The small mantras, but they used to have lots and lots of wisdom in that small meter. I'm not a literary person, but the pandits over there, we had got great pandits in our earlier sessions as well. So a small shloka or a small mantra used to have lots and lots of energy. Times have changed. We have got researchers, we have got strategy people, and they used to really converge a lot of conversations and narratives and really come out with certain frameworks and certain models around which the entire conversations can be woven through. So in the modern day parlance, I can say we have got one such rishi, one such researcher, the Chief Strategy Officer from Campus Management Corp, Mr. Connor Gray. He has been traveling with us since Chandigarh to Chennai to Pune and now in Delhi. And he has certainly attracted the fascination of the entire higher education fraternity across. The ceiling is a bit low here. The design was not probably for putting up a chhatra over here. So he has come up with something called a superstorm model, and he really presents it so well that the entire audience used to get flabbergasted that really he has captured the real futuristic intent. So I would request Connor to just introduce the entire audience to his entire superstorm, which is affecting the higher education space, and what he has, some solution, some mantra for that resolution. So let's welcome Mr. Connor Gray for this.
Thank you very, very much. Can everybody hear me now?
There's lavalier mic there too, I think, if you want to use that.
Yeah, I kind of would. Thank you. It's hard for me to just stand behind the podium. I believe you can hear me now. Again, I feel very honored to be here today. As was mentioned earlier, I've been in all 4 events now. And, you know, a couple of things that I wanted to just go over and share with you related to, you know, my role as Chief Strategy Officer at Campus Management is to sort of incorporate a lot of the observations that we're seeing globally within higher education that seem relevant to this particular audience and some of the changes that are going on. Not just that we see in India, but probably much more of a global perspective. One of those aspects, and it was mentioned earlier, just regarding change, and that things are constantly changing. If you go back to the 1976 Olympics, there was a great Olympic swimmer, Mark Spitz, who went on and won 7 gold medals, and he was at the time, one of the top Olympic athletes ever. Actually set world records in all of his events. And the interesting thing is that, in a sport such as swimming, where, it's really a very individual sport, all you have is you in the water, the times that he set as winning times at that point in time, world records, wouldn't even have qualified him to have been in the finals of the more recent Olympics. Which just is evidence that things are constantly changing, and even, people that have reached the pinnacle today doesn't necessarily guarantee success as they move forward into the future. And within higher education, we've got a lot of dynamics going on that can very well change, sort of the order. And what we've seen is those changes happening around sort of what we've collectively term the superstorm happening within higher education. These are disruptive influences that are converging simultaneously on a lot of different institutions from different directions. And they sort of center around 4 different areas. One of those is around the changes in how higher education can be delivered. As Raj mentioned earlier, right, there's tons of content available. The advent of MOOCs, the ability to deliver programs online without students actually being present in a physical classroom, have completely changed the dynamics of higher education, resulting in disruption, just like we've seen in other industries outside of education, and how that's really fundamentally served to reshape it. Another aspect of change that's occurring is around competition. Partly enabled by the changes in the delivery models, right, is that the spectrum of who potentially you're competing with for students, competing with for research dollars, the global perspective of education and the ability for students to access education essentially almost anywhere in the world is now something that is not beyond their grasp. Interestingly enough, though, that also, while on the one hand it's a threat, on the other hand it's an opportunity, which also means that higher education institutions in India can actually be exporters as well, and gain students and gain acclaim beyond what has historically been their boundaries. The other aspect of this that we see is changing is around governance and compliance. In all the markets that we tend to operate within, there's constantly changes that are going on in terms of how institutions are regulated, how they're accredited, and there's a number of things that are going on even within India related to the political processes that potentially serve as disruptors for higher education institutions. And the last aspect that we see is all of the aspect around outcomes has two different dimensions. One of it is the overall changes that are happening relative to things that came out in the survey around focus on placements. And it's the ability of the students that we are educating that in fact they're able to find jobs. The other aspect that we see change around, in particular probably more so in the United States, is the conversation that's now beginning to happen around student success and the obligation of institutions to actually ensure that the students that they're admitting into their programs actually are able to succeed and earn their degree. And that it's no longer acceptable to have the historic paradigm where the teacher on the first day of the freshman coming in is look to your left, look to your right, one of you won't be here next year. And then in fact that's not an acceptable position for the institution to actually adopt, and that they actually have an obligation to ensure that the students that they're admitting into their programs do succeed and are able to succeed academically as well as in their career aspirations. But underlying all of these various dimensions, any one of which could serve to reshape any other industry, much less having all four of them converging simultaneously, is the generational shift that's going on within prospective inbound students. Today's prospective inbound student, the 18 to 20-something-year-old students that we're teaching today have never known a world that didn't have an internet. If they want to know something, they just Google it. So the answers are prevalent, right? The Google's indexed the world. And then the last piece is they're very comfortable with technology as being part of the overall educational experience, whether that's online or something that's just being augmented in terms of how that educational experience is being conveyed. This is just continuing to grow. This is a comment from my previous employer, which was Google, just prior to joining campus management, in which Eric Schmidt talks about the fact that we're going to have another 5 billion users of the internet within the next decade. Access and the prevalence of technology is going to continue to rise and grow, and we're going to continue to have future generations that are very comfortable with technology being part of the fabric of their educational experience. The other aspect of this that we see changing and having influence has been around the notion of the customer. Customer is sort of an interesting word to even be using in higher education. In fact, many people would believe that it potentially even doesn't even have a place in higher education and academia. But in fact, as most institutions mature, their thoughts begin to center around the fact that, well, there probably is a customer. And oftentimes the initial view is that customer is the institution themselves in terms of the faculty and staff. We see that oftentimes that begins to shift and change and that there's becomes a much more student-centered focus, or potentially even broader around not only the student but the family that's making the commitment to the particular institution, and then ultimately their alumni. But the more recent shift has been around beginning to view that the real customer of many institutions is the potential employers and employers of the students. And in fact, that the students themselves may be the product of the institution, and that ultimately it's being reshaped by, the money and their ability to achieve their objectives. Within higher education, there's also unbundling and rebundling of education that we're seeing, and the ability to deliver the content of that in various fashions. One of the in vogue things today for technology is to talk about things like software as a service, infrastructure as a service, with the advent of cloud computing. You can kind of think about education being capable of delivered in a number of different fashions as well. The ability to deliver courses as a service, whether that's part of workforce development, executive education, certification, MOOCs, the ability to deliver sort of the entire program as a service, whether that's through online or hybrid methods of education. And then the last piece that we are seeing is really the ability to pull credits from multiple sources together as part of the overall ability of a student to receive a degree. We don't see this in India so much, but there's a lot of conversation going on around competency-based education in the United States, and the ability of students to essentially earn credit by achieving the overall learning objective of the course. And their ability to demonstrate proficiency in that essentially enables them to progress along the degree path. And also notions around credit portability and the ability to move credits across institutions as part of how they're able to overall earn a degree.